Hello and welcome to See You in Court, a podcast that informs you about the Georgia civil justice system, what it means to you, and how it protects individual rights. During each episode, we dive deep into stories, cases, and insights that matter to Georgians. You can learn more on our website at www.seeyouincourtpodcast.org. Join the conversation on our YouTube channel at See You in Court Podcast, and stay connected with us on our Facebook page at facebook.com/seeyouincourtpodcast. This podcast is sponsored by the Georgia Civil Justice Foundation. Your hosts are robinfrazerclark and Lester Tate, who are both past presidents of the State Bar of Georgia and who both serve on the board of directors of the Georgia Civil Justice Foundation. And now this episode of See You in Court.
Good morning, friends and lovers of the law, and welcome to See You in Court. I am Robin Frazer Clark, and with us here today, as always, is our incomparable co-host, Lester Tate. Hey, Lester, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. You know, it's week 0 of college football, and I'm hearkening back to last year when I was in Ireland to watch my Yellow Jackets defeat the Fighting Seminoles in the Irish homeland. They're not there this year, but Tech opens, I guess, next week. But there is an Ireland game this week. So
I noticed that. Yeah, that would be fun. I know you went when Tech was playing, and that was fun. But yeah, we're counting down the days in the Clark household until UGA.
It's great. I highly recommend the Emerald Isle when football is afoot.
American football.
Yes. Well, and even when it's not, it's a great place to go. We got a great show.
It's a great place to go.
Yeah, we got a great show here Ireland today, Robin, with Seth.
Very important subject. Yeah. And for our viewers and listeners, I'm drinking coffee at 4:00. We're taping this at 4:00 on Wednesday afternoon. I'm having my usual French roast or whatever it is in our See You in Court mug. So I'm fully caffeinated.
And Seth and Lynne, you will be thrilled beyond belief to know that you too will receive See You in Court mugs for your participation here today.
I was hoping that was the case, that there would be a suitable parting gift.
I'll treasure them.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, well, you will. And you'll think of us every time you drink coffee out of court.
Well, Robin, tell our audience about these guests that we have.
Let me introduce Seth and Lynne, and we're going to be talking about their new endeavor called Georgia Lawyers for the Rule of Law, and we're very excited about it. Seth Kirschenbaum is a criminal defense attorney here in Atlanta with 50 years experience. He's an owner of his own law firm, Tate and Kirschenbaum. He is extremely well known in the Atlanta Bar, being a past president of the Atlanta Bar Association. He served on the State Bar Board of Governors for 20 years. He's a former federal prosecutor. He is the recipient of the 2008 Charles E. Watkins Jr. Award for Distinguished and Sustained Service by Atlanta Bar Association and of the 2011 Randolph Thrower Lifetime Achievement Award. He has an award named after him, which is pretty awesome. The Multi-Bar Leadership Council's Seth D. Kirschenbaum Diversity Award. He received his BA from State University of New York at Binghamton, New York, and received his JD with distinction from Emory University School of Law, my alma mater. Before entering private practice, he was a federal prosecutor with the Department of Justice for 6 years. Lynne Borsuk is also a criminal defense attorney here in Atlanta. She is the owner of her own law firm, the Lynne Y. Borsuk Criminal Defense and White Collar Crime Law Firm. Lynne is an experienced trial lawyer with 38 years of experience as an attorney in the courtrooms of Georgia. She focuses on criminal defense and white collar matters with a strong emphasis on the trial phase of legal advocacy. Lynne was selected by her peers as a top trial lawyer and named a fellow of the American College of Trial Lawyers and a fellow of the American Board of Criminal Lawyers. Lynne has served as the president of the Georgia Association for Criminal Defense Lawyers. Lynne is the recipient of numerous awards: Indigent Defense Award from Georgia Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers, the Women of Achievement Award, Jewish Federation of Atlanta for work with ADL, and the Leadership Award of the Atlanta Bar Association. She received her BA in Political Science from 1983 from Emory University and her JD in 1986 from the University of Florida College of Law. Wow. Lynne and Seth, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you, Robin.
We're very glad to have you here, and we're going to talk about your new endeavor that both of you are working on called Georgia Lawyers for the Rule of Law. So we're trying to get out the message of Georgia Lawyers for the Rule of Law. Let's talk about it. Tell us a little bit about what this group is and what your mission is.
Well, first of all, since we're a twosome, Lynne and I kind of tried to work out something where we would maybe alternate or
Okay.
tag team answers. So
Robin and I don't do that. We just have a free call,
you just got to interrupt.
We wing it.
So I'll start and say that after this national administration came into office, in the first few weeks, there were a lot of actions that were unusual and aggressive that seemed to be assaults or attacks on the rule of law. And among those were attacks on judges who ruled, whose rulings the administration did not like, and there were including calls for impeachment of judges and threats against judges, and there were also threats against lawyers and law firms because of who they represented. And after a number of weeks of this, a group of lawyers got together to talk about whether there was something we should be doing about this, whether there needed to be a response from the legal community. And out of a meeting that we held back in March, we decided to create the Georgia Lawyers for the Rule of Law. And our primary vision is that we are going to speak out in defense of the rule of law where we see efforts to attack it or undermine it, including defending judges who are unfairly attacked because of their rulings or threatened, and defending lawyers who are attacked because of whom they represent. And of course, there are other areas of concern, like which we're going to talk about today, including undermining the right of folks in this country to due process of law. And we're going to be talking about that today. And we're determined to talk and to speak out and stand up for the rule of law. And we're really the only group of lawyers in Georgia who are organized to do this. No other group in Georgia of lawyers is making it its job to educate people, to speak out in defense of the rule of law, and to call out attacks on the rule of law when they happen. And we also have a speakers committee that's going to be conducting civic education. I think Fred would really appreciate this. We're going to have lawyers who are willing to go into schools, churches, community groups, garden clubs, neighborhood associations to talk about the rule of law, the importance of the rule of law, and some of the issues of the day. So we're very excited about it, and we're making great progress in setting up our organization. We have over 400 Georgia lawyers who have joined us so far, and we have a lawyer outreach committee that's planning on reaching out to all the lawyers of Georgia to let them know about us and to encourage lawyers to join us in our quest to speak out.
So, Seth, I'm gonna jump in and ask you a question here that I think is sort of one of the issues that's I think you're doing a great thing here, and I'm glad that you've organized Georgia Lawyers. But one thing that frequently comes up in this rule of law debate is that you have people like, when current president, when he was on trial, attacking the judge, in his case, or attacking now district court rulings that are not favorable to the administration. But you also have folks who are, in my opinion, justifiably angry at the United States Supreme Court, for overturning Roe v. Wade. And so how do we, how do you address that with folks that are sort of in different political camps? And I guess, do you think they just view the rule of law differently, or it seems like everybody's got something they want to attack on?
Yeah, well, one of the bedrock principles of our nation is that we settle our disputes in court, and that is the place to litigate our differences. And every time there's a court decision, there's a winner and there's a loser. So somebody's happy and someone's unhappy, and that's the nature of the system. And I think that one of our precepts is that, you're entitled to criticize a ruling and you're entitled to be unhappy with the ruling. But the answer to that is if you don't like it, you can appeal it to a higher court. But one of the bedrock principles of our country is that we have to respect the decisions of courts and follow them. And for hundreds of years, we have done that in this country. And look, I understand why people, who care about really important issues like the Roe v. Wade issue, there's passions on both sides, and reasonable minds can differ about questions like that. But the important thing for the good of our nation and for the strength of our nation is that we respect and abide by the rulings of courts. And I know that's hard when you're the loser, but that's the recipe for a successful justice system.
I guess what I'm saying is one of our challenges is we're promoting a system that I very much believe in. Y'all know that, but which by its very nature can only have a 50% satisfaction rate, in the long run.
That's right. But for hundreds of years, we have operated within that system, and people have followed the rulings of courts, whether they liked them or didn't like them. And we have refrained from, for the most part, from attacking judges, threatening judges, doxing judges, threatening their family members or their employees. This is kind of a new phenomenon, and it's dangerous. And we don't want a system where judges are intimidated or afraid to render independent judgment. And so it is a challenge, but that's the system we have, and it's worked real well for a couple hundred years. And we're speaking up in defense of that system against an administration that has a tendency to kind of flex its muscles and push the envelope and see how much it can, exert in terms of power. And it is a big challenge, but that's the challenge that we have.
I think especially right now, it's difficult because our Department of Justice, our own administration's Attorney General, seems to be promoting attacking of judges, the disagreement with their opinions publicly, undermining their opinions. One person has just been recently confirmed as a United States federal court judge, and they had text message after text message from him telling line prosecutors to ignore a ruling from a judge, which in our world is unheard of. You would never tell a line prosecutor to ignore a ruling. Lynne, what are your thoughts about that? Things have definitely changed since we first started in the 80s practicing law. What do we do about this?
One of the reasons that our justice system works so well is that we as lawyers have traditionally had deep respect for the law and for the judiciary. When a judge rules against us, if we disagree with it, we appeal it. This, if accurate, these allegations that that text messages were sent out or directions were given from the Department of Justice to line prosecutors to disregard a judge's order would be extremely serious, because it erodes confidence in our system of justice. And as it was just said a moment ago, Lester, we have a 50% chance of winning. And in fact, if you're on the criminal defense side, perhaps a lower chance of winning. You fight as hard as you can. You fight within the rules as a lawyer, and then you deal with the consequences of the case. But having fairness and knowing that prosecutors are going to abide by basic rules of fairness, and that the defense will also abide by basic rules of fairness, and that both sides will respect the judge's rulings, is one of the bedrock things that has allowed our system to function so well and with fairness and impartiality. And it's absolutely unacceptable that the Department of Justice would instruct a line attorney to disregard a judge's orders.
Well, I totally agree. It's shocking. And I can't even, I thought that would disqualify him. I thought even Republican senators wouldn't vote to confirm him after that. But it's something new every day with this administration. So he did get confirmed, and now he's on the bench, which is really scary. I'm wondering, have we heard of or seen any sort of this undermining of respect for the judiciary, or undermining respect for our civil and criminal justice systems here in the state of Georgia? Have you heard of anything, or do you think the state of affairs is pretty good in Georgia?
I have not heard of a whole lot, but there's one story I have heard. It's a now retired federal judge who heard one of the election cases, and he was threatened. His family was threatened. He had to hire private security to go to and from work, and that was I think that was a very tough time for him. Mm-hmm. And so, when you think about it, we want our judges to be independent. But if judges start getting their lives threatened or their families threatened by one side or the other, think about it. That can have an impact on a judge's ruling. A judge in the back of her mind might think, gosh, if I rule against this person, what could happen? And there have been instances of violence and even murder of judges in the country. So I think I heard a recent poll said that more than 70% of judges feel threatened because of rulings they have made. I'm not saying they've been threatened, but they feel threatened. So there is a kind of a climate of fear nationally that judges are talking about, which is really kind of unprecedented. We've never really had this broad a problem before.
Lynne, I want to ask you about I think as I look around the room here, we're all little law people. We're not big law people that are on this broadcast today. But a lot of these administration orders have targeted big law firms that happen to have one partner out of 200 that, sued somebody that the administration didn't like, or had undertaken an investigation in a prior administration or whatever else. And, as being I'm on the board of governors of the American Bar, and the American Bar Association has filed a lawsuit to keep law firms from being targeted, and if you've got standing to sort of protect all your members. But one of the things that was most concerning to me maybe even over and above the attempt to sort of punish lawyers for whom their clients is the fact that a lot of these large law firms capitulated and went and figuratively sued for peace and kind of folded. And I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit and what, because in my mind, I don't think a single law firm that stood up to those executive orders lost in court. I think every single one of them, I didn't know of one, and I followed it pretty closely. So what say you about the capitulators?
I think this is a fascinating issue, and I have been deeply distressed and disappointed to see large law firms bend the knee and fold under pressure. One thing to remember for us as lawyers to remember, and for the public to keep in mind, is that our rules of professional responsibility require that we take on a wide range of clients, including clients who are unpopular. And that's an important thing to keep in mind. So to punish an attorney or a law firm for taking on clients who are unpopular is entirely unacceptable. For the administration to put pressure on law firms because of someone they may have represented is inappropriate. And Lester, you asked me specifically, what do I think about those firms that capitulated? And as I mentioned, I'm deeply disappointed in their capitulation. I think that they have failed to think fully about their professional responsibilities, or their obligations as lawyers to represent everyone, including those who are unpopular. And I think that they have, in their fear, created a dynamic that is deeply unhealthy for our democracy. And so I disapprove of their capitulation. And I think that time will show that it was unwise to capitulate.
Do you wonder? I'm a big fan of Thomas Erskine. A lot of people don't know who he was. He's a British barrister that defended Thomas Paine. And one of my favorite quotes is he said, "I will forever at all hazards assert the dignity, independence, and integrity of the bar, without which impartial justice, the most valuable part of the English Constitution, can have no existence." And so that's sort of how, in the Thomas Paine era, we felt about lawyers and about the necessity of them sort of standing up. And I wonder if you think like I do, would I hire one of these law firms that would capitulate like this? I mean, it seems to me to be exactly what you're not looking for. If your company's on the line, if your life is on the line, if your friends or family are in deep trouble, I mean, it doesn't seem to me it's the kind of lawyers you would want to hire that didn't have the heart to stand up for themselves.
The heart, the strength, the commitment to the rule of law, and the commitment to our legal responsibilities, or our code of professional responsibility. The capitulation, I think, can lead, the pressure on the law firms can lead to a chilling of legal advocacy, right? Large firms shying away from perhaps controversial clients. We don't want that as a culture. As a culture, we want lawyers who are willing to take on unpopular clients and unpopular subjects. And the capitulation to this pressure from the administration undermines the independence of the legal profession. And that is deeply unfortunate.
And there have been anecdotes of some of these large firms losing clients because clients saying, well, if you won't stand up for yourself, how can I expect you to fight for me? And so some of the big law firms that stood up to the administration have, gained clients, and some of the firms that bent the knee have cowered. When we started our organization, a very prominent Republican Georgia lawyer was a member of our group, and he worked for a big law firm. And after about a month, he basically said, "I have to quit your group. My law firm has told me that I can't participate in Georgia Lawyers for the Rule of Law." So to your point, Lester, there's no big law lawyers to speak of in our group, although there are a few, but not many.
And one other
hold on a second.
I was
going to say, this is about the time when Lester likes to remind us that John Adams represented many of the soldiers in the Boston Massacre, which was not a very popular client, but he understood the rule of law way back then, and we need to get back to that. We certainly understand it, but some of our members in America don't. And I'll say, I wanted to bring out this point when you're talking about the capitulation of these law firms, Lynne. This is in the ABA's complaint, their lawsuit they filed against the administration. And at least 8 large law firms have capitulated and have actually paid hundreds of millions of dollars to the Trump, the president's library, whatever he asked, they've done it, or pro bono hours, whatever. And so he said in a Time, this is the president speaking, in a Time magazine article in response to a question about how he has used these threats and lawsuits and other forms of coercion, he responded, "Well, I got to be doing something right because I've had a lot of firms give me a lot of money." Now, that is disgusting to me, is one word that comes to mind. Maybe time will tell, as you say, Seth, that these law firms are not going to be, they're going to be losing clients, and the firms that didn't capitulate and said, we're not going to put up with this, will gain those clients. I hope. But when it's coming from the top down, go ahead.
It's tricky for us because we're very disappointed that big law has bent the knee, and we could use their help, and we could use their lawyers to be members of our group and stand up for the rule of law. But we don't really know the pressures they were under. There were many groups within these firms, and some of the groups are pitted against other groups because, the deal makers may think they're going to lose business, and the litigators want to fight. And the pro bono departments of the law firm are saying, well, we want to keep our pro bono stuff alive. So it's complicated. And I want to be careful that I don't want to be in the business of attacking lawyers and law firms. We've got enough to do dealing with attacks on the rule of law to keep us busy for a long time. And while I hope that maybe over time big law will find its footing and their voices and stick their necks above the parapet to stand up for the rule of law, but for now I want to really our group really needs to focus its efforts on the very real assaults that are happening, and part of that is to speak out against retaliating against lawyers and law firms, because as Lynne said, that a lot of these big law firms were doing free death penalty work. They were representing immigrants for free, undocumented people. All that stuff could be on the chopping block if they're afraid of retaliation by the administration. So it's very disturbing, but
Well, let's talk for just a moment, Seth, about talk and action, and sort of where we're going with some of this, because and in our outline, Robin listed a bunch of groups, most of which I'm a member of, that have spoken out against violations of the rule of law and whatnot. But the American Bar Association, who I mentioned before, and full disclosure, I'm not speaking for them, but I am on the board of governors. And but one of the things that we got, one of the most favorable reactions from our membership about, was when we filed suit to protect the law firms from the executive orders. And a lot of those were big law firms, but there are a lot of little law firms that would have qualified, had the same clientele, the same needs that they did. And so aside from simply taking to the stump and talking about this and sort of educating people, and I'm not trying to diminish that as a tool. I think it's a very, very important tool. But are there other things that you all are looking to do to back this up and try to take concrete action on?
Well, first of all, when we first started, we from the beginning, we've worked with the ABA Task Force for Democracy, and Bill Ide, the late Bill Ide, who was a Georgia,
the late great Bill Ide,
who was an Atlanta lawyer and a past president of the American Bar Association, and was co-chair of the ABA Task Force for Democracy. Bill was at our first meeting here in Atlanta in March, and he spoke about these issues to our group and helped catalyze the creation of Georgia Lawyers for the Rule of Law. And so we really admire what the ABA is doing. Couple of points. There are lawyers in Georgia. There are various lawyer groups in Georgia that are engaging in active litigation. There's one group that's representing immigrants who are under fire from the administration, people who are asylum seekers, and people who have run into trouble with the administration over immigration issues. There's another group of lawyers in Georgia that are representing federal employees who have been fired, often without going through proper channels or following the rules for firing people. So there are active lawyer groups in Georgia, not to mention the ACLU, which is doing yeoman's work. We have really been set up to be to speak. And to your point, Lester, I'll say this: a very prominent political scientist I read said that one of the indicia of authoritarianism is fear of criticizing the government, fear of speaking out against the authoritarian regime. And we have, as we've been discussing, we have seen palpable examples of that fear in our country. Not only these large law firms that not only didn't speak out, but they bent the knee, but major universities who have been cowed into submission, who have been basically backed into a corner and don't want to criticize the administration because of threats to withhold hundreds of millions of dollars in grants. And I would dare say there are even Republicans who are afraid to criticize this administration. I can give you a very concrete example of that. And it would be of Senator Joni Ernst, who was a champion of women's rights in the military. And when Hedgeseth was nominated, she made some noise about, I'm not sure that this guy, I'm a supporter of this guy because he was so misogynistic and he was so critical of women being in the military. And then the MAGA world attacked Joni Ernst, and within about 4 days, she changed her tune, she shut up, and she voted for Hedgeseth's confirmation. So there's a lot of fear in this country, like that we have never seen before, not in my lifetime. And
I think the Joni Ernst example is probably a little bit of what I'm asking about here, because you had somebody that was very vocal, but it came time to actually do something, and they didn't really do anything.
What I'm saying is that speaking up is important, and speaking up in this climate of fear in the country right now, it's important. It's very important, and there's even potential danger for people that stick their heads above the parapet and say, "Wait a minute, what the administration is doing here is wrong, and it violates due process, or it's an attack on the rule of law." And as I said, we're the only group that's speaking to Georgians about the only lawyer groups speaking out in defense of the rule of law here in Georgia. And so I think speaking out is important. And trying to be heard in in this crazy world. I mean, one little group of lawyers down in Georgia speaking out may only have a marginal effect, but it's an opportunity to talk to Georgians and to let Georgians know that right now 400 Georgia lawyers and counting disagree with something that is going on, and these are the reasons why. So yes, for now, our plan is to speak out, is to engage in civic education, and to recruit more lawyers to help us and join us. And I'll tell you, we have our hands full right now, just getting this organized and up and running. But there are other groups that are litigating and are in court. We're not really set up to do that right now. I'm not saying we might not evolve into doing things like amicus briefs or having some folks doing more hands-on lawyer type work. But right now, our plan is to be a voice in defense of the rule of law here in Georgia.
Lester, may I speak to that as well?
Sure.
I think that that there's real strength in numbers. And in Georgia, we have 45,000 lawyers or thereabouts. This group started a few months back in the spring with 3 lawyers. It's grown to 401 as of today. I think when that number continues to expand, I'm so sorry about that. I think when that number continues to expand as Georgia lawyers, Republicans and independents and libertarians and Democrats, all of whom are welcome in this group, and all of whom I would hope have deep respect for the rule of law, as this group grows and as the tent grows wider and wider, then perhaps the Georgia lawyers for the rule of law can provide a meaningful sense of support for the judiciary, for government lawyers, for law firms and individual lawyers who are representing unpopular individuals who may get targeted by the government. And so I think that as we grow, that organically, that this speaking up will start to have resonance and will start to have strength of its own. And it's our hope that in and of itself, lawyers standing up for the rule of law, what could be more natural? This is what we do. We believe in the rule of law. This is why we're lawyers.
And we took an oath.
We took an oath. We took an oath to support the Constitution. And I think, back when I was president of the Atlanta Bar, the bar had a policy of when judges were attacked, had a policy that we would speak out publicly in support of the judge. And one thing judges can't do is they can't hold a press conference and defend themselves. They have to keep their mouths shut. And so one thing we want to be available for is to speak up in defense of judges who are unfairly attacked and lawyers who are unfairly attacked. So
one thing that impressed me, I was at the State Bar annual meeting this summer. Where were we? We were down in Ponte Vedra, Florida, and the Chief Justice of our Supreme Court, Nels Peterson, was there representing the court. And he made a statement about the attack on the rule of law and how they were not going to put up with it. It wasn't going to happen on his watch. And to re-emphasize that, he made us all stand up and take the oath again. And
Well,
I thought, okay, he's headed in the right direction. I like to hear this.
when he made his State of the Judiciary address to the Georgia legislature, he talked about rule of law in that address. And at the Atlanta Bar Association's annual meeting, he was the keynote speaker, and all he talked about was the rule of law. And he had all the lawyers in the Atlanta Bar's annual meeting stand up and retake our oath. So Nels Peterson really is all in on this. But as a judge, there's a limit on what he can say and what he can do. He can't really get out there and like criticize.
But I deeply appreciate Justice Peterson's taking his opportunity to speak out clearly and strongly about the importance of the rule of law. It is essential. Laws are the foundation of a civilized society. We have to have respect for our judicial system in order for it to work. And so I have enormous respect for him using his opportunity to speak publicly to speak about the importance of
And isn't it remarkable that this very conservative judge, he's not a liberal, he's a conservative guy,
right,
is so moved by what he's seeing going on in this country that he's been moved to actually talk about the rule of law everywhere he goes.
That's not remarkable at all, because the rule of law is neither conservative nor liberal. It is entirely nonpartisan. And it doesn't matter what your political beliefs are. We, as lawyers, are all committed to the rule of law.
I guess what I mean is that no Chief Justice of the Georgia Supreme Court has ever felt compelled to have to go out and do this before. We never had this kind of situation.
And I don't see a lot of other chief justices of other Supreme Courts doing this. So I'm very proud of our chief. And I agree, Seth. I mean, we all know he's a conservative guy. We all know that. But it would be so easy to use this, and he's got an enormous platform, to use this to talk about conservative issues. He doesn't. To Lynne's point, he is nonpartisan on this issue. He promotes the rule of law and is, like you said, using every platform he has to promote the rule of law. I think it's fantastic. I felt so good about the State Bar annual meeting, having him there and doing that. It was very well received.
Agreed.
So we're gonna be writing. What are we gonna be writing? What's our call to action? We're gonna be writing letters. We're gonna be writing blog posts. You mentioned Amicus briefs, and I'm sure we have some brief writers that would be willing to, if there is litigation, to join in that. But
Lynne's the chair of the communications committee, so let her
awesome
going on there.
Yeah. We're going to be issuing opinion pieces on a weekly basis, and they will run the gamut of wherever there are threats or attacks on the rule of law. Issues that we might cover, what we've been talking about today, attacks on judges or attacks on the judiciary as a whole. There was recently a lawsuit filed by Department of Justice against the entire Maryland federal bench. Unprecedented.
I did not know that.
We'll be speaking out about defiance or resistance to court orders. Lester, we were talking about the targeting of law firms and the targeting of attorneys, the disregard for legal precedent and norms. We'll be talking about the over-expansive use of executive orders, or the weaponization of government agencies, or if the administration interferes with investigations. We must have the impartial application of justice. So when that happens, we will be speaking out. If there's a withholding of congressionally appropriated funds, and if it reaches the level of a rule of law violation, we'll be speaking out of that. Where there's an erosion of democratic norms, we will speak out about that. One of the things that's been so disturbing in the last few months is what appears to be an attempt to erode the separation of powers, with an executive branch that is trying to diminish the efficacy and strength of the other two branches. That is not acceptable in a system that is designed to have checks and balances between three branches of government.
I'm going to jump in. We're also going to drill down into specific issues like the denial of due process in ICE arrests. We have these ICE agents out there wearing masks, no identification, just snatching people off the streets because they look like they might be, here illegally, and then spiriting them away, and not these folks not having opportunities to go before judges and be heard. So there's a lot of problems in the immigration enforcement area, and we're going to be speaking out very forcefully in that area. And then there's specific issues arising out of the Justice Department that we talked about earlier today with, Pamela Bondi announced an investigation of Judge Borsuk because he, in a private meeting with other judges, expressed concern that the administration might not follow their orders. And as a result of his expressing that concern, the Justice Department filed a complaint against him. And the Attorney General of the United States announced that complaint on social media. Well, this is obviously an attempt to intimidate this judge who has been hearing these immigration cases. We're going to be speaking out on issues like that.
That's great. I pulled an article written by one of our prior guests, Steve Vladeck, Professor Vladeck from Georgetown Law, and it's from the New York Times. And the headline is, "This attack on a federal judge is preposterous." And he goes into all the things that you just mentioned, Seth, about how ridiculous it is, and that much of what is in the AG's complaint is false, which is mind-blowing that an attorney general would put false statements in a legal document at pleading. But it goes to the point of chilling speech, which is our constitutional right. I mean, that's one of the things that makes us an American. But with the attack on the federal judiciary or these ICE, as you called it, a snatching of folks, they're grabbing citizens, not immigrants, not necessarily immigrants, but people who are American citizens are being grabbed and taken away. We have a friend who is dark-skinned, and he's from India originally. He has a very prominently Indian name, but he's an American citizen. But when he left to go to India not too long ago, he asked us for the name of an immigration lawyer so that he could have her on speed dial because he was worried about his dark skin getting him abducted by ICE. I'm like, we understand. Gosh, yeah, we get it. But that shouldn't be America. That's un-American.
It's fear. I mean, again, we're talking about fear. People are afraid. If you lived in the immigrant community right now, I mean, they're hiding out in their homes. They're afraid to go. And I heard a story that they grabbed a Navajo Indian. The Navajo were here before anybody. And
the most American you can get.
Right, exactly.
They were here first.
And another real concern, I think, is, first of all, they're going to be tripling the size of ICE. It's going to be kind of a private army. And if the tactics that ICE is using against immigrants could be used against Americans. If they could be used.
I think it may have been used against Americans, just
not
widespread as we fear yet.
There is a fear. I mean, what if your local police department? One of the excuses they have for being masked is that they're being attacked, like their ICE agents are being doxxed or something like that. Well, any police officer could say he had that fear. And what if your local police department started having masked police officers without identification, snatching people off the street.
Well, if that was the concern, Seth, I think lawyers would have been wearing masks going back about 200 years, because unpopular causes. I'm going to play devil's advocate just a second with you all. And some of what we experience now, I trace back to the year 2000, when we had a very close contested election and had a lot of litigation in Florida over that. And I'm proud to say, as a member of the bar, if you come to my house offering me a judgeship, I'm going to run you off the property with my shotgun. It's just not something that I really want to do. And I have always strived to be an advocate for the practicing bar. And so I think the bar behaved very professionally throughout that. You have David Boies and Ted Olson, having dinner together when they, after they fight each other in court, as per the Shakespearean mandate. But then you go to the United States Supreme Court, and it goes right down the line on the vote. Essentially each justice in a very fractured opinion ruling for the political party that they are identified with. And so I wonder, when you go out and you talk to a group of folks, and you're at the Garden Club or you're the Kiwanis Club or wherever you are, and you say, boy, the system we got's really great. And you could have a lot of Democrats and a lot of Republicans that say this system's rigged. When it comes right down to it, all these folks are doing is ruling based on their own political bent. It's not the rule of law, it's the rule of power. And so why should I support this system that it is, to use the phrase, it's become one of the most common used words in the English language since 2016. It's rigged, and there is this sort of attack on elites, now. That's part of, I think, the allure for some people of some of the cabinet appointments, and things like this. It's, we've got an administration of podcasters now, and so what do you say to somebody like that, and somebody that's not a lawyer? I sell used cars. I've seen what they do down there at the Supreme Court. Everybody votes for whoever appointed them.
One thing I was most proud of, I think you could only imagine how Al Gore felt, when that decision came down. And to his credit, he accepted the decision of the Supreme Court, and Bush became president. And I'm sure Al Gore and his team, were thinking some of the same thoughts that you're proposing, but they followed the ruling of the court, and that kept our country going. And I would point out that in the early skirmishes, and hundreds of lawsuits have been filed against this administration, quite a few Trump-appointed judges have ruled against the administration in cases. So it hasn't just been this ironclad this way or that way based on your political affiliation. I would take issue with that. On the other hand, Lester, look, when we started on this quest back in March, we realized that with a compliant Congress, it was going to be up to the courts to preserve our system of justice. And in the early going, the courts, I thought the federal courts have done quite a good job of dealing with the issues that came before them. But let's face it, a lot of what's going to happen going forward is going to be in the hands of the Supreme Court, and this Supreme Court is going to have a tremendous amount of responsibility and pressure on it to defend the rule of law, because they're the deciders, not us. And I'm, look, I mean, I would be a liar if I said I didn't have some concern about the supermajority on that court and some of their positions. But I will say this, that if we're going to preserve our system of justice and we're going to preserve our democracy, then whether I like it or not, I'm going to abide by the decisions of this Supreme Court, because that's the system that has stood us in good stead for more than 200 years.
Lincoln, my beau ideal of a country lawyer, which I aspire to be, not president, but as a country lawyer. And, he spoke out vehemently against Dred Scott, and said, while I have respect for the rule of law and respect for the court's decision, I think it's wrong. And I mean to overturn it.
Hey, look at the Sotomayor dissent in the birthright citizenship case, which was really about, nationwide injunctions. I mean, that was a full-throated, 5-alarm fire call to arms from a Supreme Court justice. So It's okay to criticize a decision, but we all have to abide by them.
Well, and I mean, I think that's one of the things that I've talked about in some of the governing bar groups I've been on is what's a fair criticism and what's an unfair criticism. A fair criticism is you overturned 50 years of precedent. Doesn't mean it's not needed sometimes. Dred Scott needed to be overturned, in my opinion. But, it would be a fair criticism to say that applied to that just like it did the overturning of Roe v. Wade.
I think calling a judge a left-wing lunatic or someone who's insane or a power hungry, I mean, using those kinds of pejorative ad hominem attacks are unfair criticism. Calling for the impeachment of a judge is not appropriate, especially from high government officials.
Right.
Look, we have a time-honored practice of criticizing the court decisions we don't like, and that's perfectly okay. But to threaten judges, to intimidate judges, to dox judges, to send pizzas to their sisters' homes, or to have bomb threats to judges, like happened to Amy Coney Barrett, that's inappropriate and unacceptable.
Yeah, I agree. And talking about Justice Sotomayor's dissent, it also reminds me of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She was kind of the dissent queen. We've interviewed an author who wrote The Great Dissenter, who was about not Ruth Bader Ginsburg, but John Marshall Harlan, Justice Harlan. But
another great country lawyer.
Another great country lawyer from Kentucky, only Supreme Court justice from Kentucky ever. I'll just point that out. But Ruth Bader Ginsburg always said, I'm going to keep dissenting and writing a dissent, and hopefully at some point it will help change minds. And that's what I think about. And I think about your group that you're starting, Georgia Lawyers for the Rule of Law. Keep educating, keep writing dissents or opposing viewpoints. And maybe at some point it'll be a breakthrough to these folks, and maybe they'll have a hard time going to sleep one night and be thinking about it. That's kind of the way I look at it: is keep dissenting, keep getting our viewpoint out, that no matter what, we're going to stand by the rule of law, and we're not going to stop.
We are going to continue to stand by the rule of law. And if you think of what turned around the country in the McCarthy era, which was such an unfortunate time, was perhaps hundreds of people standing up hundreds of times. And then at one point, someone said, "Have you no shame?" And it's somehow the accumulation of standing up to that which was unright and unjust hit a nerve, and people realized that it was wrong, and they stood up, and that ended the wrongful conduct. Here we have terrible overreach by the government, or significant overreach by the government. We have a series of using the administration misusing the system for its own revenge, for its own private revenge, or the use of law coercively. That's not acceptable. And most Americans, perhaps almost all Americans, know that this is wrong. This is not a private legal system. This is everybody's justice system, and it only works when it works impartially. And we need all of us, all Georgians, and all Georgia lawyers need to continue to stand up and say when things are not done fairly, when there is not due process. We deserve better, and our system of law provides better, and we need to stand up for it.
I want to jump in and say too, Lynne, that the lawyer you were talking about that's set up and called them out, Joseph Welch, a Boston trial lawyer representing the Army in the McCarthy hearings, is the one who did that. Another one of my heroes, and he was at the right place at the right time. And there's a great story that you can find on YouTube though about him, about how he had been waiting for that moment. He made it look like it was extemporaneous, but he had thought about this. And he was waiting for that moment like a good trial lawyer would. And when McCarthy got out over his skis, he took him to the woodshed.
As we're closing up, I want to make the point that we're now over 400 lawyers and growing, and we're trying to do it in a responsible way. We're trying to communicate in a lawyerly way where we don't want to sound like our hair, even though my hair may be on fire privately. The way we want to express ourselves publicly is with dignity and with grace. We're going to speak about tough issues. We're not going to shy away from tough issues. We're not going to be afraid, but we're going to do it in a way that we hope will engender respect. First of all, from the legal community, that we're responsible, thoughtful lawyers that are standing up for the oath that we took to defend the rule of law. And we hope that resonates with folks and will truly communicate that we're trying to be nonpartisan. This should be a nonpartisan issue.
Agree. I'm excited about your efforts and happy to be one of your 401 members. Yes.
Lester, have you joined us, Lester?
I have not. I have committed to do so, but I have been remiss in actually going online to do it. But you have my
put me in, Coach. Commitment. I'm ready to go.
You have my public commitment that I will.
It's beautiful, Lester. It's free.
Well, Lynne and Seth, it's been a delight having you today. As we've told you, the last question we ask of every one of our guests is, how do you define justice? And I'd like to hear each one of you talk a little bit about that. How do you define justice? Who wants to go first?
I'll go first. Justice means that everybody has a fair shot when their matter needs to be litigated in court. It means that poor people, not just rich people, but all people, regardless of their economic background, are heard and heard fairly in court. It means that everyone has the same due process rights. Everyone gets treated the same in our justice system. And justice really is for all. And our justice system should not be used as a vehicle of revenge, and our laws should not be used coercively to target people. The laws need to apply to everyone equally, and equality and understanding the rules, in other words, due process, and everyone having those rules apply the same will result in justice for all.
Seth?
I completely agree with what Lynne just said, and I guess I would only add that we're Georgia lawyers for the rule of law, and so naturally, we really believe that in the rule of law, the importance of the rule of law, the fact that we are a nation of laws and not of men is what has made this country great. That's truly what makes our country great. That's what makes our country the shining city on the hill that Ronald Reagan referred to, that the rest of the world looks to for leadership and inspiration. It's why people are dying to get into America, is because we are a nation of laws. And if we can continue to safeguard our system and protect and defend the Constitution and the rule of law, that will lead to a just society.
Wonderful. Totally agree with both of you. And looking forward to what your organization is going to do, and I'll be happy to join in any effort. Thank y'all so much for being here. Again, I want to remind our listeners, we've been talking with Seth Kirschenbaum and Lynne Borsuk about Georgia Lawyers for the Rule of Law. You can find out more about their important mission at georgialawyersfortheruleoflaw.org. Thank you, Seth and Lynne.
Thank you, Robin and Lester, for having us.
Thank you so much.
All right, Lester, now is the time that we share with our listeners a news item, legal-related, law-related news item. And I'll go first.
Sure.
Couple of things. One little thing I just wanted to point out is that, and I mentioned him in our podcast today, is Professor Steve Vladeck, who's been a guest on our show about the Supreme Court. He's the author of the book, The Shadow Docket. He is now on TikTok. And so he's using short little videos on TikTok to talk about the shadow docket and these emergency orders from the Supreme Court and what they mean and the havoc they may be wreaking. So I just wanted to mention that you can find Steve Vladeck on TikTok now. But my real news item is close to home. Because it involves you, my friend.
Oh my gosh.
And the headline, we've talked about it, but I wanted to share this with our listeners in case they missed it. But the headline, and this is from the Cincinnati Enquirer, so from Ohio. The headline is Classic After Concessions Ran Out Saturday Night. And this is about the baseball game that the Braves played at the Bristol Motor Speedway. I think it's the first time they've ever done that, but where they created a baseball field in the middle of a NASCAR speedway. And it was a huge thing. I think a huge crowd, 80 or 90,000 attendees. And Lester and your family were there.
We went.
And unfortunately, the weather didn't cooperate, and it rained and rained and rained. I think they started the game late, very, very late, got one inning played. But this article talks about that many fans complained that the venue ran out of many food items at the concession stands. And they mentioned this during the broadcast. Before Sunday, then they resumed the game the next day on Sunday. And WSB TV's Allison Mastrangelo tweeted that a gas station near the Speedway had a line of Atlanta Braves and Cincinnati Red fans buying food and drinks to bring into the game with them, adding that the fans were allowed to do so because concessions ran out Saturday night. Georgia lawyer Lester Tate, a former head of the State Bar of Georgia and head of Judicial Qualifications Commission, referred to the Bristol game as the, quote, the MLB version of Fry Fest, close quote. And we know that this great quote of yours, Lester, not only got printed in the Cincinnati Enquirer, but in various other news
I made the New York Times. I've now been quoted.
New York Times. I mean, you're all over Twitter. So famous now. You were kind of famous already, but now you're being quoted by all these other news publications. So great quote, and hats off to you, my friend.
Well, we got there literally at the time it started raining. The time the game started, and the Major League Baseball had wanted to break the attendance record, which was approximately 85,000 people. So it's not like one of my first cases. I had a kid where his parents go out of town and he decides to have a party, and like 2 high schools show up. This wasn't unplanned, that they knew how many people were coming, and they had, they said, we got to the front of the line and they said, we've got hot dogs, but we don't have any buns. And we've got nachos, but we don't have any cheese. It was interesting. And I tweeted about it, and I put a picture of the bunless hot dogs on, and I think it was that as much as the quote that made it take off. But I had a lot of fun with it. Just had a lot of fun with it. And one of the things too, is that some of the response you get on Twitter. Somebody says, I can't believe you compared that to people being on an island without water. Like there's somebody for everything now.
Yeah, get a sense of humor, people. Come on.
Yeah. Well, I have my story, and it kind of lines up with our program today. I think I'm going to pronounce the name right, but it's a story from National Public Radio, August 18th, 2025. Jimmy Lai, L-A-I, I think that's the way you pronounce that. Closing arguments and Hong Kong tycoon's national security trial begins. And so Jimmy Lai is a pro-democracy media mogul, and he is on trial in Hong Kong. He's 77 years old. As I think most folks know, Hong Kong was a British possession. In the year 2000, it reverted back. Maybe it was 1999, but it reverted back to the Chinese. And so what he is accused of, he puts out a pro-democracy newsletter, and authorities have accused Lai of using his tabloid Apple Daily to advocate for international sanctions against Hong Kong and China after Beijing imposed national security law in 2020 following anti-government protests that erupted the year before. The legislation criminalizes acts of secession, subversion, terrorism, and collusion with foreign forces to endanger national security. Chinese and Hong Kong officials say that since the law took effect, it has restored stability in the territory, while critics argue it has been used to silence dissent. And part of this has involved a trip that he made to the United States. He met with Vice President Pence, about individual rights and human rights. And so then he returned to this. He's in jail. He faces a life sentence, and they've begun closing arguments that are supposed to last about 8 days, but much longer than you would ever get away with in the state of Georgia. But I think this is an important thing, and I want to give just a little bit of context about this. So Hong Kong was, in fact, a British possession and had the British common law system. They had barristers, solicitors, just like Britain, the same system that our system grew out of, and very respected courts and very respected lawyers in Hong Kong. And I think most folks looking at this are going to say, what's happening here? He's an enemy of the government. He's a critic of the government. He speaks out against the government. They've come up with these charges and put him on trial for these charges for reasons of free speech and not for anything else. And so, and it's happening in a place that had a judicial system that's just like ours. Mm-hmm. And so when you talk about the rule of law and as our guest did today, and supporting that, I think it's a great example, or well, maybe a not so great example, but a poignant example of what happens when the rule of law breaks down.
What could happen, where we could be headed if we don't insist on the rule of law. Kind of reminds me too of Navalny, critic of Putin. Yeah, and they just arrest him for criticizing Putin and then kill him in a gulag.
Yeah, Jimmy here is way past bunless hot dogs and cheeseless nachos. He's got real complaints. First world problems is what I had in Bristol. So,
oh man, well, great point. Great news item. Well, we want to thank our sponsor, the Georgia Civil Justice System, and our producer, Philip Hoover, and we thank all of our listeners for listening. You can learn more about Lester at aikentate.com and more about me, Robin, at gatriallawyers.net. And you can listen to all of our episodes on seeyouincourtpodcast.org or wherever you get your podcast. And you can see us on youtube.com now as well. That's all I have, Lester. Until next time,
we'll see you in court.
We'll see you in court.
You've been listening to the See You in Court podcast, brought to you by the Georgia Civil Justice Foundation. Remember, justice is a shared journey, and your engagement makes all the difference. For further insight and resources, visit our website at www.seeyouincourtpodcast.org. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at See You in Court Podcast for additional content. And don't forget to engage with our community on Facebook.com/seeyouincourtpodcast. Special thanks to our producer, Philip Hoover. I'm Fred Smith, Executive Director of the Georgia Civil Justice Foundation. You may learn more about the foundation at www.fairplay.org.